The past decade has been one of enormous change in the Indiana courts. From the advancement of problem-solving courts and the advent of electronic filing to solving Indiana's attorney shortage, the push has been on to improve the return on Hoosiers' investment in the courts. Those advances have been championed, and in some cases driven by, the Indiana Supreme Court. What's behind this drive to make the courts better? What's next? On this episode of INSession, we'll find out. I'm John McGauley, and we're talking to Indiana's Chief Justice, the Honorable Loretta Rush, about the past, present, and future of the Indiana judiciary.
All rise. Mount Superior Court is now in session.
We have a very special episode of INSession for you today. We are on location at the Indiana State House for a conversation with arguably the most influential person in the Indiana judiciary. I have the great pleasure of welcoming to the podcast today the Honorable Loretta Rush, Chief Justice of Indiana. Justice Rush, thanks for coming on the podcast. Looking forward to what I know will be a fascinating conversation.
Thank you, John.
Now, I mentioned we're at the State House, but I have to mention that we are in the conference room where the justices come together to talk about cases, sitting at one of the most incredible pieces of furniture I have ever sat at, and I understand there is a story behind this.
We sit around this table as a court of last resort and decide what the law is in Indiana, and sometimes we sit around here a long time to find out where there's a majority. We are just all sitting around here today. We'll be sitting around here discussing 2 oral arguments on Thursday. So it has a lot of meaning, and all of us that interviewed for the position on the court, anyone going through the Judicial Nominating Commission will sit at this table. Well, it used to be about 2/3 of the size, so I had 2 sort of small tables attached at the end, so it was like the kids' table. Yeah. And so when you're coming in and interviewing and you're sitting down, 6 inches from the rest, it's just, there's a lack of parity there. So the governor's office, which I have a huge amount of respect for Governor Holcomb and have been in his office many times, has a beautiful table that was built by the Department of Corrections. So I asked them if they would consider building one for the Supreme Court, and they did, and it's spectacular. These men at Pendleton built it with all Indiana wood. They designed it. It has a big seal of the state of Indiana. It has, and all this was their idea, it has the names of all 111 justices of the Indiana Supreme Court from the beginning to the end. It starts right here by me, Judge Johnson, ends with Derek Moulter. And so it also has a plaque at the end with Article 1, Section 18 from the Indiana Constitution, stating that our criminal justice system should be based on principles of reformation. I decided I was going to go out and thank them because it's so beautiful, and I went out there to thank them and shook their hands, and it was really a moment thinking that here these men are incarcerated that have this talent. These are all people who have pretty significant sentences, but there's just such a redemptive quality to meeting with them, shaking their hands, thanking them for this act of kindness, and we should always take that into account and remember that constitutional provision when we sit around and issue judgments.
And that had to mean a lot to them, that you came and shook their hands and said thank you. That really had to be special.
Well, it wasn't to my sheriff. He wasn't that happy that I went out there with all those tools, but it really was special for me as well, and Justice Moulter joined me.
And it's a blend of new and old. It was pointed out to me that the outer edge of the table actually matches the outer edge of the room. So, new and old, building built in the 1800s and a table made this year.
Yes, and for all your listeners, if you're ever at the Indiana State House, just come up to the sheriff's desk on the 3rd floor, and we'll give you a tour of the table.
Wonderful. Well, let's jump in with a civics lesson. There are 5 of you, 5 justices on the Indiana Supreme Court. You're appointed by the governor to 10-year terms. But after the governor makes his choice, the public gets to weigh in through a statewide retention vote 2 years after you're appointed and every 10 years after that. And I think you are on the ballot this year, aren't you?
Yes. Justice Massa, Justice Moulter, and myself are on the ballot.
Well, let's talk about the role of the Chief Justice in the overall operation of not just Supreme Court operations, but overall judicial branch operations. How does your role differ from that of the other justices?
Well, the role is defined by the Indiana Constitution as well as many, many statutes. I do stay at the judiciary to talk about the condition of the courts. I do the budget presentations for the budget for the entire Indiana judiciary. There's study commissions, that Indiana court study commissions. There's a lot of legislative appointments. There's meetings, and then we have roughly around 550 plus judicial officers, 19,000 licensed attorneys in the state, and we have 250 employees. So you're sort of the CEO of a large corporation. I have Justin Faulkner, who's our chief administrative officer. I have fantastic managers, but you have to keep up on all that. We did a lot of things with regard to restructuring. Chief Justice Shepard had been there 25 years. He knew the court, so it had grown very horizontally, and it's so many direct reports, so many different software systems. So we restructured the court. We hired a CFO. We made different departments. We just recently made the decision to hire a behavioral health specialist to work on that need. I meet with the managers weekly, and it's called CJ Update, and then I also meet with Justin weekly, at least once a week, if not. We talk more frequently than that, and then you just sort of have to keep your hand on the pulse of how your employees are doing. You work with your administrative staff. I look at exit interviews of employees, what's working with our employees, what's not, salaries, wages, judges' salaries, and then you also are responsible for at least signing off in the end with people. A lot of people have good ideas. So you sort of have to weed through the good ideas. What can we do? What is to scale, like cameras in the courtroom? What are we going to do to study it? I just had a meeting today about AI and putting together a work group to really stay ahead of AI. I think there's some harnessing of AI that'll be just critical for access to the courts, interpreting, but we've got to be careful with regard to that. The Futures Commission, like the attorney shortage. So you really have to keep your finger on the pulse of what's going on, make yourself accessible to the trial court judges. We're not a unified court system, so we can't just say, boom. You need to really have your trial courts buy into what you're doing. We always include our trial courts in as much as possible, and we really have them lead a lot of initiatives. We have many things we do in Indiana are sort of bottom up. We have it come up through our trial courts at what's going to work for them.
I want to backtrack for a second and offer a compliment to your staff that you mentioned. They don't just provide input here in the State House. I have a lot of, in my day job back in Allen County as the court administrator, speak frequently to Justin Faulkner, who you mentioned, and a good number of your staff who make sure that we have the resources we need and that we're plugged into what's going on in Indianapolis.
That's a huge goal of the court. Thanks for mentioning that. We set up our entire Supreme Court services, that Office of Judicial Administration, to meet the needs of the trial court. So if you have a communication issue, or if you have a high-profile case, you're going to call Catherine Dolan. If you have an employee issue, you're going to call Heather Falks. If you've got an interpreter issue, you're going to call Rob Love, who heads that department. Everything we do to set up our courts, we set it up to the benefit of the trial courts, as opposed to just servicing the Supreme Court.
Well, it shows, especially you mentioned interpreter issues. That is a big challenge in communities as diverse as ours, and they help us out tremendously.
Well, we have a lot of work to do in that. We have a lot of work to do, but there's some, why aren't we leveraging AI to help with interpreting? We travel the state and meet with all our trial court judges to listen to them every other year in district meetings. We have meetings with them all year, but this is a specific one where we go to them and they sort of pass the mic. And interpreter issues, they're talking about languages that cannot get interpreters, particularly Haitian Creole and Burmese. So how do we pool our resources? How do we look at emerging technologies? So a lot of work needs to be done in that area, because it's important people know what's going on in a courtroom.
I ought to mention, you were recently appointed to another 5-year term as Chief Justice, your third, I believe. What made you want to take on that challenge again?
I think we're at an interesting time in history. I think our state's going through a lot of changes. I think our nation is going through a lot of changes. And I look at sort of the legal landscape in Indiana, and a third of our judges are new. And I just thought some stability and continuity we all benefited from. And I will not be on the bench as long as Chief Justice Shepard. This will be my last term, I believe, as chief, if I get through the retention in a month. But I think that sort of institutional integrity, stability, we have a number of initiatives going. I was asked by my colleagues, they all unanimously supported me doing it. So I had to really make sure that sort of the bloom wasn't off the rose, so to speak, some days. But I thought it was important that we have sort of that continuity. I've been an attorney and a judge for 42 years. I care deeply about our judicial and legal system.
Wonderful.
So I thought just to get through this time of transition would be impactful. And also, looking at the leadership from within the court. I have got wonderful colleagues that will be able to, when I'm done, step in and do an excellent job with regard to keeping the momentum going.
You know, a lot of people, I doubt, understand the true scope of what you do and what the Supreme Court does. So let's talk about that for a second. On a previous episode of our podcast, Judge Mathias of the Court of Appeals referred to the Supreme Court as the court of last resort in Indiana. It's the highest appellate court in the state. In 2023, you all received more than 700 new cases, from civil and criminal matters to attorney discipline cases. How do you manage that large of a caseload?
Well, what's unique with our court, well, first let me start with just a little bit of background. 98% of the cases in the country are in the state courts. So you see a lot about the U.S. Supreme Court in the news, but sort of what happens on a daily basis in people's lives play out in our state courts. So we have 1.6 million cases pending in our courts. About 1.1 million cases were filed in the last year. So it is a large amount. And so if you have a case that comes up to the Indiana Supreme Court, some cases we take automatically. If there's a statute's been called, or a law's been called unconstitutional, we have some capital cases going on right now. Life without parole cases come directly to us. Probably there's an original action. There's a whole type of cases that jump right from the trial court up to the Supreme Court. And then you've got cases that you've got discretionary review. And that means it's certiorari if you're on the U.S. Supreme Court. So we decide if that's a case that if there's a mistake of law or any of a number of factors that we should jump in and do. But you have 5 sets of eyes. Each of us read every document. So it's not a law clerk reading them to see if you take it. We read those cases, and if one person wants to discuss a case, we sit around this table and we see if we're going to take the case, set aside the Court of Appeals opinion and set it for oral argument, or just set it for oral argument. So there's a lot of accountability with regard to that case, that great grievous error of law, or somebody wrongfully incarcerated, or who's looking at it, who's minding the store to see if error's done. I think our court does a really good job, but it is a lot of reading. I mean, it's about, when we used to have paper filing, it's about half. I'm not that tall for you radio or podcast listeners, but it's about half my body length. I feel like I'm reading every week. So when I'm not doing administrative matters, I am reading. I used to take home grocery bags because you couldn't fit the cases in a briefcase. And I spent a lot of evenings and weekends reading cases. I was going to say, you
probably got a lot of homework.
Yeah, Justice Shepard said he used to. 60% of his job was being Chief Justice. The other 60% was cases. And his wife said, you're Chief Justice when you're at the State House, and you're reading, writing, and researching when you're at home. And I do a lot of that.
One interesting difference between perhaps what people think of when they listen to the talk about the Supreme Court of the United States versus the Indiana Supreme Court. They talk about the term of the U.S. Supreme Court. You all are in session all year long.
Yes, we meet and we vote on cases year-round. We do not have oral arguments in July and August, which is for us as much as the attorneys. But it makes for a busy June and a busy September.
I'll bet. When you think about that caseload we were talking about a minute ago, what is the most important question the Indiana Supreme Court regularly gets called on to decide?
You really can't prioritize, because if you're a litigant in a case, it's the most important question to you. But we have a lot of issues of first impression. We have a case, oral argument, and I was working on it just before I came in here, and it has 3 issues of first impression. Or we develop the common law, and what that is the legislature makes laws, but sometimes there is no law. And we've got to decide if the common law should be extended. And I'll just give you a couple examples. We had a case, privacy. People care about their privacy. So should we adopt a new tort if your medical information gets disseminated, right, to other people, and it gets published? You don't want to read about a medical test on Facebook. Do you have a private right of action for that? And we found that you did. Also, under the Fifth Amendment, can you be compelled to turn over the contents of your cell phone? Or do you have a right to remain silent? And, think about everything that's on a cell phone without some search warrant with particularity. So we've looked at privacy, constitutional rights, the Indiana Constitution. A lot of people don't realize we have 2 constitutions. I've written a couple law review articles about Indiana Constitution. It is a breadbasket of protections for people's liberties. It's important that we explore and utilize those protections.
So maybe I should have phrased it differently. How about the most frequent question you get called on to answer?
Every day is different. There's a lot of criminal cases. We have a unique constitutional provision called 7B that we can set aside a sentence. Like, let's say, we had a couple cases where a juvenile committed a bad crime but got 150 years. Should his sentence be reduced so he has a chance of getting out at some point? So those are unique. We get a lot of 7B, sufficiency of the evidence. Was there enough for the jury to find? With a strong presumption of in favor of the fact finder, whether it's a jury or the judge that heard the case. We realize that we're 2 floors up from where that action is really happening.
Like you said, every day's different. So we've done a little bit of civics so far, and we'll get back to that for sure, but let's take a quick detour and introduce listeners to you, the Chief Justice. Your background really is remarkable. Private practice attorney, a local trial court judge, a Supreme Court justice, and 2 years after you got here, the Chief Justice. You've really done it all. Tell me about the path that brought you from Tippecanoe County to the State House.
There's a lot of people that could do a wonderful job as Chief Justice. I am not alone in that. I think sometimes it's a matter of just timing. I moved around a lot. I moved maybe 16 times when I was growing up, and I ended up in Indiana, which brought me to Purdue. I thought I wanted to be an engineer, but we were not made for each other. But I did marry an engineer and been married for 40 plus years. But I always liked the law. So I was a private practice attorney in 1983. I did litigation. I really liked courtroom work. And I was very much drawn to, probably my law firm didn't like it, even when I was a partner. They didn't like the fact I did a lot of pro bono work. I represented a lot of women at the women's shelter on victims of domestic violence. And I was really pulled towards kids who were abused and neglected in the system. So I was a guardian ad litem, I think, to hundreds of children as a pro bono basis. And it was that work that had a group come and say, would you run for juvenile court judge? So that was a big turn from being a civil litigator to juvenile court, and I loved it. So I was there 13 years, really looked at a lot of systems improvement in our county, state, and nationally with regard to juvenile laws and doing better by the kids that find themselves in our courtroom. But in 2012, Indiana was one of just a couple states in the country that didn't have a woman on their Supreme Court. And a lot of us said, we got to do something about that. So a lot of us applied. I had no idea that I'd be the last one standing on this, because there were some really remarkable women that applied. I had never met Governor Daniels. Having been a trial court judge, I was non-political, nonpartisan for a long period of time, and was just thrilled when I got the call to do that. And then about a year and a half later, Chief Justice Dixon said he was going to step down as chief, and all 4 of us interviewed to be chief. I was the newest one on the court. Did not really think that it would happen. And when they were deliberating, Justice Rucker goes, let's all go out for ice cream. And I love this about my court. We all went out for ice cream together while they're deliberating. Came back, and I lost both my parents within the year of when I got on the court. And I had Dad's radio and the song, Queen song, Under Pressure, the David Bowie Queen version. So I was like cranking that up. All of a sudden I heard my clerks playing Hail to the Chief. And that's how I found out I was Chief Justice.
And you're the first female Chief Justice in the state of Indiana, correct?
Yes, there's been no other. There's been one other woman, Myra Selby, who did a remarkable job. She was on the court for about 4 years back in the 1990s, but that's it.
It's worth mentioning, you noted your appreciation for Under Pressure. I read somewhere not too long ago that your walk-up song is Girls Just Want to Have Fun by Cyndi Lauper.
Oh, that was, yeah. I always come up with those things. I don't know exactly what my walk-up song, but I thought that I was talking about what were the challenges, and so the challenges, still being the only woman in the room after all these years. Yeah. So I thought that would fit right into Girls Just Want to Have Fun. And you have to laugh and not take yourself too seriously. And yes, I like having fun.
I enjoyed when I read that. That was fun.
And my favorite gadget was, do you remember what it was? My immersion blender.
Yes, I do remember that. What interests you in the outside world? If you weren't Chief Justice of the Indiana Supreme Court, where do you think you might have landed?
I think we can all live our lives sort of in chapters and different parts. I think right now, if I wasn't Chief Justice, I'd want to be a civil legal aid attorney. I see too many people going to court unrepresented, and I like the courtroom. And I'd love to go back to do some advocacy. So that would really interest me. I do like teaching. So there'll be another chapter. It won't be 60 hours administrative, 60 hours of legal, or 60% that. But I have a lot of other interests. I'm very involved with my community. I still live in Lafayette. I'm very connected with my church friends, grandkids. There's plenty to fill my days.
Plenty to do. We've talked a little bit about the depth and the scope of your job and the job of the Supreme Court. It's stressful, it's hard, I'm sure, but there has to be a side of this that calls to you. What is the best part about being Chief Justice?
Think about our mission, justice, doing justice. Who gets to have their vocation be the pursuit of justice? So I remember when I first came on as chief, some of the people go, "You expect too much." I go, I know I do, but this is a pursuit of justice.
Yeah.
I want people to stand outside courtrooms and think, I'm going to get a fair shake. I'm going to get it in a timely manner. And that systems improvement to make courts and justice more accessible. You think about people going to court, and you've been involved, John, in the court system for a long time. They're coming on their worst day.
Yes.
And their case is the most important case, and they need to be treated like their case is the most important case. So I think public trust, and I know you're going to ask me about that later, but I think it's so important. But who gets to, justice tempered with mercy? I think it's a dream job to be working for the pursuit of justice in Indiana.
That's wonderful. Hopefully that's what inspires a lot of people to get into public service. Your family has to be a little awestruck by the leadership role you have and the heavy responsibility that comes along with it. Is that the case?
No. I mean, my grandkids call me Lolo, and when my children, I have 4 children, we all came up with food names, and they call me Nacho Supreme. So having been a juvenile judge for so long, I always told my children, you've got to self-regulate, you've got to learn responsibility. You would see every bad scenario, and you had to be really careful not to bring it home. And I said, if you get in trouble, you're going to get some attention. It's going to be called to you. And they go, "Oh, Mom, you think you're all that." So, I really try to separate that out.
Yeah. They keep you grounded.
They keep me grounded. And you know what? When the governor was asking me, what are you the most proud of? And when I was going through and interviewing to be a justice in the court, I said, "You mean anything?" And he said, "Yes." I go, "Raising kind children. I've got 4 very kind children." So that's what's most important.
Maybe a detour here for a second. We mentioned a second ago that you are the first female Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Does this position give you a good platform for advocating for women and girls in leadership roles?
Yes.
Or encouraging it?
I think just visually even. You don't have to, it's not, I represent all genders and races, but I think that I have this saying that you have to see the robe to be the robe. Little girls need to see people. And it really hit home for me a couple years ago. I got a picture from a little girl from a mom I did not know, and her daughter was going for History Day, and she had a black wig, black glasses, and a black robe, and she went as Chief Justice of Indiana. So I think it's important. And then Catherine, I think you were in court one day, Dolan, she goes, "Oh, these 2 girls were there with their dad. OMG, Dad, the chief is a girl." So I think it's important, because when I went to law school, there were no women on the U.S. Supreme Court. Senator Day O'Connor got appointed while I was in law school, and that was a big deal. And sort of a full circle moment for me was I got invited to her funeral. I was just, the current term is fangirl. Have you heard of that, John?
Yes.
Okay, good. Your coolness factor is still there.
A little higher than it was.
But I thought she was wonderful. I loved her jurisprudence. I liked the way she handled it. Her children spoke. Her son spoke. But it was something. But she, it was possible when you'd see her in that role. So I think it is. I think it's important. And I do a lot of mentoring with young women. I had there's a bar event that I think I've had at my house 4 times where I invite young women lawyers to come, encourage them for public service, encourage them to run for judge. I'm encouraging them. I spent a morning at Arsenal High School encouraging both young boys and girls, into the legal field. I think they need to see all of us up here doing our jobs.
Let's go back for a second and talk a little bit more about the responsibility that comes along with your job. I've been in my day job as the court administrator for 10 years now, and the level of fundamental change in the Indiana courts just in that period of time has been incredible. To name just a few of the innovations: electronic filing, statewide implementation of the Odyssey case management system, launch of the commercial courts, cameras in the courtroom, more focus on mental health programming, problem-solving courts, 24/7 access to online court dockets. We could go on. In your State of the Judiciary speech this year, you talked about the Indiana court's return on investment. It is abundantly clear that access, buy-in, and confidence in the courts of everyday Hoosiers is very important to you. A lot of leaders talk about it. You're doing it. Why is that so important to you?
Well, let me back up a little bit. It's
Sure.
not me. It's, it's the trial court judges that are running the programs. I mean, Judge Gull was instrumental in the cameras in the courtroom getting off, the problem-solving courts. I mean, Allen County, you have an abundance of fantastic judicial talent. So there's nary a program that we're doing that you folks haven't been right at the forefront leading. I've got 5 colleagues on the court, 15 Court of Appeals judges. They all put me in, what can I do? So it's not me. I have fantastic colleagues. We've got great leadership. I look at the Judges Association, the work that they're doing. And it's a matter of convening them and letting them do their great work. So it's been a large effort, not just by the chief, but I will agree it's been a dizzying amount of change.
Has.
And it'd be a case like I came to the paper we generated, a couple miles high, and there's nowhere to put it. You probably had to, where do you put all the paper that a court generates? I said, we got to go paperless. And then there's a team of people. I've got Bob Brath, who leads the Innovation Committee. We're going to go paperless. We can't. Yes, we can. I had a lot of judges say, I don't want to, I've got to read on paper. I cannot read. And I think I took the Supreme Court paperless a month before Chief Justice Dixon retired. And he goes, why are you doing this to me? I said, because you will be State's Exhibit number 1. And Justice Slaughter goes, no, but we did it. We did go paperless. And think of the money we're saving. Oh, yeah. And think about the fact, text messaging litigants, so they show up, so there's not defaults where you have to go to jail and disrupt their lives. So we really looked at, as an entire court system, court administrators, how do we become customer friendly? How do we look at these litigants as customers, and how can we make the experience for them better? Nobody's like, hey, pick me, I want to go to court. But text message reminders, lack of defaults, kiosks, messaging, going online. My case, it was really important when we did my case that it not be like the federal system that you have to pay, so you had to pay, that you make it free, because whether you're an attorney or a litigant, people having to miss work to go to the courthouse to find out if they had a court date. So there's a lot of work went in, but it was an amazing amount of people that worked to get that done.
One of the more useful customer service improvements in our courthouse back home has been almost airport-style schedule monitors. So people don't have to go find a piece of paper tacked to a bulletin board anymore to find out where they need to be. And you all paid for that through court improvement grants. Right. So the innovations...
well, because again, we're not a unified court system, and counties are strapped. Allen County doesn't have this abundance of money they want to spend on their judiciary. So all of our fiscal asks, it's not, I don't love presenting budgets. I don't know, do you present your budget in Allen County?
Yes.
Yeah, well, I do it here, and you've got to know it, and it's a lot of things you've got to go through, but I would say the vast majority of all of our budget requests are to directly benefit the trial courts. What can we do, because there's just a lack of funding. So this year, our main ones we're looking at is technology, security, and additional money for problem-solving courts. Those are our 3 asks.
You mentioned problem-solving courts and some of the things that we've been able to pilot back in Allen County. We were privileged to be a pilot site for one of the more interesting innovations you all have done in recent years, and that's the commercial courts of Indiana. Judge Craig Bobe is our commercial court judge, and he tells me that this particular court improvement project has been very important to you. A lot of people may not even know what I'm talking about, but why are the commercial courts important to you, and how are they doing in Allen County and statewide?
Well, when I became chief, and I did the same thing when I was a trial court judge. I went with all the people that touched on the juvenile system to Tippecanoe County, so I was doing the same on the Supreme Court, and one of the meetings I convened was general counsel for major corporations around the state. Met with them in the Supreme Court room, and they came, and it was pretty full. What are the problems that you, from your perspective, that you see with the court system? And they told me what their problems were. It takes too long, it costs too much money, it's hard to make a business decision if you want to grow or invest when you're tied up in litigation. So there was a model going around on commercial courts, and actually Judge Heath, when he was a judge in Allen County, sort of peppered me with it one day. I was a new justice on the courts, and then I researched it more, and then Judge Bobet ran with it, along with Judge Heath, and he's put in a tremendous amount of work. But if you have a business dispute, to highly trained judges on business litigation, to have a searchable database, to have a treatise, so you're able to get that predictability and timeliness. I mean, instead of years, it's months in the commercial court. So I think we've had about 2,500 cases, and the attorneys and the businesses have really touted them. In some contracts in Indiana, they're actually putting, instead of arbitration, they're putting that we're agreeing we're going to litigate if there's problems, this case, in a business court. So, I mean, I think it's, I think it's good for the economy. I remember reading a Chamber of Commerce article when I first got on the court saying businesses look at the litigation environment of a state before they decide to do business or invest there. And it doesn't mean businesses always win. And these are business-to-business cases. These aren't, courts are to be neutral arbitrators. You also want to get decision-makings in a way that move businesses along. There's been a lot of research done on procedural due process. Sometimes people care more about the process that they were given, the procedures of the court decision, even more so than sometimes the end result.
Let's turn back for a second to the issue of trust and confidence in institutions. I know this means a lot to you. I recently saw a quote from you where they asked what you worry about most as Chief Justice, and the answer was very simple: lack of trust in government and public institutions. There can be a pretty heavy air of hopelessness on that front sometimes. In your mind, is there still time to do anything about it, to restore confidence?
Yes, I definitely think so. Every time somebody walks in your courthouse or stands before a judge, when they're treated fairly, I mean, you're the face of justice. I always tell the clerks, they see you first, right? You're that face of justice to them, or that in that attorney office, or the public defender, or the prosecutor, and it's case by case. I go out and speak at high schools as I'm able to, so I asked a group from Indianapolis public school, how many of you trust the court system? Not a hand went up. I go, then I think I have some work to do. So then we start talking about cases. Then they start getting more engaged. They're talking to a judge. We're talking about what justice looks like. It's easy to say we need more civics education, but I think it takes time. I think it takes judges and attorneys getting out from behind their benches, meeting with students, explaining the system, because what do we have if we don't have public trust? You go to the Federalist Papers, you talk about the executive branch has the power of the police, the legislative branch has the power of the purse. We only have the power of public trust. And if people don't think that they're going to get a fair shake, and I've been there representing people, it depends who the judge knows or what kind of this, then our system of democracy breaks down. So if we're going to live in a free society where we have this neutral arbitrator, then they have to trust that, because it all falls apart. And I had the luxury, or the really honor, of 2 years ago serving as president of the Conference of Chief Justices. So I traveled the nation, I traveled the world representing the United States. So I got to go to other countries where they're talking about, they have anti-corruption courts. They set up courts to deal with the court's corruption. So if the rule of law breaks down, are you going to go back that way? And you know what a lot of the countries wanted to hear about? They wanted to hear about judicial ethics. And I think people forget that. I think we have so much accountability built into our system. We have transcripts, we have online court hearings, we've got 3 levels of review for most cases, we've got a robust both attorney and judicial discipline department. So we've got a lot of layers of accountability. So if there's a problem, report it, and we're going to deal with it. I mean, there's probably, last year, I think we had about 1,700 complaints against attorneys. I think we had 800 some complaints against judges. Every single one's investigated.
You mentioned getting out from behind the bench and giving people a way to plug into the process. You all do that. You don't just talk about it, you do that. You pack up and hit the road from the State House from time to time, the Traveling Oral Arguments program. I think just recently you were in Newton County, where 600 students got to see firsthand Supreme Court in action. What's the goal of that? I mean, is it exactly what you were just talking about?
Yes. I mean, we do this, and every time it's, we have a wonderful Office of Communication, Education, and Opportunity. Outreach. They get the high schools to come, so these kids get to see the Supreme Court have a case. And this case we had was about a window. at IU falling on a student's head? Who's responsible? Lots of issues go into it. Like they're looking, what if the beam falls and this? And then they come and ask, they can't ask about the case, but they ask us questions afterwards. And then we meet with them and they get to see us. They get to see that we care, that we're really working hard to find where the law, how to interpret the law correctly. And then when we go to a lot of universities, and we always bring high schools, we have them bust into the university because I think it's good for students to get. Some students have never step foot maybe in a university for them to see it. So I think transparency is key, and just a huge plug to our Court of Appeals. I think they've had 700 oral arguments on the road. They won a national honor. They won the Sandra Day O'Connor National Civics Award. No other Court of Appeals in the country. They've been in every county. I mean, it's just, they're amazing. So it's really pull back the curtains, hold us accountable. And that's like cameras. I don't know if your cameras in the courtroom. That's why you've got live during the COVID time. You had to live stream your hearings because you have to really pull back the curtain. I think we're the least understood branch of government.
Do the students, do the people that you present these to, how do they react? I mean, do they get a lot of good response?
Yeah, I mean, the first couple ones, and we have question and answers afterwards. First, they're all timid, and then finally, boom, they line up, and you almost don't have enough time to answer all their questions. They come alive. They come alive that they're heard, because I think we underestimate students. They care about what their future's going to look like. They care about what their institutions look like. They just want to test it. So, I mean, I think they have, you could hear a pin drop while the attorneys were arguing this case. They've been so respectful. The teachers, I mean, I give a lot of credit to the teachers that bring them, but it has been wonderful.
We're talking about public engagement and the ability of people to ask us questions and get responses. We are involved in a pretty high-profile trial up in Allen County, and that has resulted in a tremendous amount of traffic to our social media channels. And it's not always possible to engage with people. Sometimes they want to ask questions, sometimes they want to yell at us. Is that a challenge throughout the Indiana judiciary? Is social media and the courts a particular challenge?
Well, I mean, we believe in free speech, and I think that's important, but I think it is a challenge. I think misinformation and just flies. So I think you've just got to be careful with regard to it, and I think it does breed a lot of the mistrust, and, they're crooked, don't believe them, da-da-da-da, she's a child trafficker, my kids read stuff about me and they go, Mom, and I said, I know. I mean, it just kind of comes with the job. Yeah. But it's so easy to do it behind the curtain. But I think you just have to keep doing your job. Yeah. You have to keep the expectations for the judiciary high and realize, what your role is in a judge in a republic. Our job is sort of hold the line, and that's what I think our judges are doing, and doing to the best of their ability.
So we've mentioned a lot of innovation. We've mentioned a lot of what's already happened. Mentioned earlier that you've just been reappointed to a new term as Chief Justice. What are your goals? Oh,
I mean, I think increasing. I think the public trust is important, but I look at sort of the Futures Commission and the attorney shortage as a real issue. Indiana's like in the bottom of the country with regard to number of lawyers, and people say, "Well, we don't need lawyers." You do until you're standing in court accused of a crime and need an attorney, and you have a constitutional right to be represented. We need to have trained excellent judges. When you have a small county, you can't even get people to apply to be a judge or a prosecutor. Or again, when you talk about coming to court because your liberties are at issue. So I think the attorney shortage is real, and I worry about justice by geography. Like if you're in a community that has a problem-solving court, you stay out of jail. But if you're in a community where they don't have one, you're in jail. I mean, that's justice by geography, and it's wrong. So I'm looking at how we can use technology, how we sort of harness AI to the extent we can to utilize it for accessibility and for some of the reasons we talked about before. The civil legal aid, pro bono, attorneys, we had a meeting this morning with the Indiana Bar Foundation about the kiosks. How do we bring law to the people in a way that they can understand? I mean, I'd love to see a kiosk in a Dollar General in a rural community that's open, so that you're able to get on there and find out when your court dates are, find out what you can do. So I think the goals are the attorney shortage, AI, accessibility, and continue to make the courts more consumer friendly.
If you could snap your fingers and bring about a new innovation tomorrow, would it be along those lines? You talked about, the kiosk in the Dollar General. What
Well,
would
I mean,
mean
that's
the
just an
most to you?
example. We have them in libraries and that. I'm just worried about people that maybe work a shift that they're unable to get to the library
Sure.
while they're open. I mean, I would have everyone that had a civil legal aid need would have access to an attorney.
So let's turn for a second and talk about something that I know is dear to your heart. One of the things you did when you were a trial court judge back in Tippecanoe County was create Tippecanoe County's CASA program, Court-Appointed Special Advocates. This is a program that we derive a tremendous amount of benefit from back in Allen County. Community-minded volunteers teaming up with professional staff to advocate in court for the needs of children involved in abuse and neglect cases. Why was CASA so special to you?
Well, I was one of a team that brought it. Actually, Sheila Clinker was the legislator that also helped bring it to Tippecanoe County. When you think about people coming to court, you think about you're removed from your home. Think about your kids. You're removed from your home. You hear there's something called a court case. And where's your voice? Where's your voice? Who's there to tell the judge how you're doing?
Yeah.
I think it's just critical. I remember when, we had, at one point we had about 500,000 people in our country in the foster care system. And I remember when Hurricane Katrina hit, about 500,000 people were displaced. So their home was no longer there. They didn't know what their future held. That's very much like a child that is removed from a home. You don't know when you're going to go home. You may be separated from your siblings. You don't know what your future is going to hold. Who's your voice? I think CASAs are imperative to that. So the CASAs are under the direction of the Indiana Supreme Court, the funding that goes out to the counties, and the legislature has been very generous with giving us CASA funding. But it's always a problem with needing more volunteers. And for anyone that's listening to that, if you really want to say, I want to do something meaningful, do this. I used to do all the training. I used to do training every year for the CASAs. Not all the training. I was part of the training. We did 2 trainings a year for CASA, and I was part of that training both times a year. And I think it is, if I can put my finger on one thing that I think can make a difference in a child who's involved in the system's life, it's a good CASA. I've seen children that had a CASA get to college. I've seen children who had a CASA get dental work. I've seen children get back with a family member. So it's not scary. These kids are amazing. There's a resiliency that these children have that have been through such trauma. So we really need CASAs, both men and women. I was also the Big Brother, Big Sister program, which is different from the CASA. My husband was also involved with the Big, and it's just that connection. I mean, what's more important in life than those relationships, those connections, where you can maybe help someone along. So it's a two-way. Being a CASA, you're not just helping the child's helping you too.
I think it bears repeating, our director back in Allen County, when I told her I was coming down to have this conversation with you, please tell people that we always need more. And my question was going to be, and I think you've already answered, what would you say to somebody who might want to spend some time in a volunteer role and make an impact to convince them to become a CASA? But you said, if you want to do something meaningful, this is it.
If you want to do something meaningful, and I think people are scared of the unknown, but the training is so good. You've got a wonderful CASA director. But, there can be burnout, and you may say, I can take this many cases, I want to break, and then take another one, but encourage them, because I used to, when I would get a stack of documents, in juvenile court you get a lot of papers filed at the last minute, I'd always read the CASA report first, because it was always just kind of plain English, common sense, this is what that child needs, and let's start the case there.
One of the battles we fight back at the local level is a perception that the courts are expensive. What few people really know is that you go to bat, and you mentioned this earlier about presenting the budget, you go to bat every state budget cycle to get more funding for the General Assembly back to the counties to support the courts. Talk about that for a moment. How much local support is the Supreme Court responsible for? I can think of technology, interpreter grants, court improvement grants. How much of what we do...
Yeah, well, I think there's still a lot with regard to paying for court reporters and paying for public defenders. But, every year we are able to keep chipping away. I mean, I think the problem-solving court, the pretrial certifications, even just something like Zoom licenses. We're going to continue to buy your Zoom licenses so you can have remote hearings, because the efficiencies on so many hearings are important. So I think the educating the General Assembly and how important, I always call courts are engines of economic development. You know, collecting child support, getting guardianships, so the grandma can get custody of her grandchildren because parents are struggling with addiction, so they're not in the system. Veterans that have a number of civil actions that, you know, we've done a lot with veterans courts and working with the VA. So I think that boost, and now I'd like to provide more funding for court security for locals, because threats to judges I've never seen them this high.
I've never seen them this high. I've never seen the level of threats to staff.
At the staff,
it
and then the
really,
judges' families.
Yeah, it's incredible. We mentioned earlier, and maybe this is worth touching on again, problem-solving courts. We have 9 of them back in Allen County. Drug court, veterans court, reentry court, more and more all the time. They make an enormous impact.
Family recovery courts.
That's right. And our newest one is domestic violence court. They make an enormous impact on lives and recovery and families, not to mention jail populations, which is also a big challenge for us in Allen County. You are clearly a big proponent of those. Talk about why and what the statewide impact of these problem-solving courts really is.
Do you know, you could go to any community and say, who are the people that are cycling in and out of your jails, maybe on low-level felonies, but we're not turning the needle. I mean, we've done a lot of work on substance abuse disorder and, drug addiction and mental health. They permeate so many of our court cases, and to just lock them up for a period of time, let them out, lock them up for a period of time, we're just destroying families in the community. They're creating havoc. There's public safety issues. So what's working? And we have really rigorous certifications for problem-solving court. You can't just slap a sign on the door saying I'm problem-solving court. You've got to make sure you're following best practices. But it flips the recidivism rates on its head. I mean, the people that go through there that are able to maintain their job, support their family, reconnect with their kids, it's justice tempered with mercy. I mean, it's just beautiful, and I'm sure that you've attended many of these, and I would encourage anybody, you could tell them how they find out and to attend. The public can attend these graduations, and they are remarkable testaments of hard work. But when you understand, we have to punish the crime, but we need to deal with the litigant. And substance use disorder it's a chronic disease. It's a treatable disease. And when you treat it as a treatable disease and offer services that we know now work for them, it really has a good impact on lives and families and jail populations. I was just looking at 7.8% of children have had an incarcerated parent or caregiver. What's that doing? So it's not just the people that are in jail, it's the kids, and it's I've been around long enough. I used to see generations. Children who were abused and neglected became delinquents, became parents who were in the welfare system, and it just keeps turning.
Between problem-solving courts and the criminal Rule 26 reforms that we also, I think, were part of piloting, I
don't know what Allen County hasn't piloted. So tell me one thing where you've not been at the forefront.
I can't think of anything.
No, and John, that's a lot with you too, and your judges. I mean, it's like listen, I think this is going to work, and put me in. And when you look at who's leading, I mean, your county's not only doing things around county, you're leader statewide, so you're bringing change to small rural communities. So I often use Allen County as, what are they doing up there? You need to go job shadow, court shadow them for a while.
Just have them give me a call. We can stop by anytime. You used a term a minute ago that I thought was eloquent in its brevity and meaning, and that was justice by geography. That kind of feeds into my next question. Let's talk a little bit about the future. In April, the Supreme Court convened the Commission on Indiana's Legal Future to look into the shortage of attorneys that you've mentioned already. I think it would surprise people to know the extent to which our state is underserved in the legal field. Talk about the Commission for a moment, the problem it's addressing, and why that should be of concern to everyday Hoosiers.
Well, I mean, you can't wait till 5-10 years from now. You've got to sort of look at the landscape, and this is definitely there. We are on the bottom, I think we're at the bottom 10 states with attorneys per capita, and there's some counties that you can watch the aging of the attorneys, and there'll soon be no attorneys in there, sort of the graying of our profession. And what does it mean? Well, you think, what does it mean if you want to set up a corporation, or if you want to write a will, or if you want to get a divorce, or if you want to get a guardianship, or you have a contract dispute and you can't get an attorney because you live in a rural community? Does it mean you have to go up to Indianapolis. And then on the criminal side, you have a constitutional right to be represented on a case. We take that seriously. We don't want you to stand and look at significant criminal consequences. You need to have somebody help you, inform you of your rights, and help work through the system. And then when, there'll be a judgeship that'll come open, maybe it's hard to find one person to apply for judge. It's not a profession that you kind of just fall into. We want to make sure we get the best and the brightest and the wisest to be sitting in judgment as a judge.
And if folks want to see the direction that the commission's taking, there's a preliminary report already out, available
I
online.
would also suggest a podcast with Justin Faulkner and Nancy Vedic would be a very good podcast to talk about the futures, because I think it's a lot. They're talking about limited license. They're talking about paralegals that maybe could handle things like evictions or child support. So it's far-reaching. They're talking about scholarships, how to draw people in the public service. There's 23 members, but it's like 100 after that with regard to all the people on the committee. So I feel like we've got our best and brightest minds on this, working on this issue, workforce development, so we can come up with some solutions. So 10 years from now, we'll say, how did this happen?
I know we are running out of time, so I want to ask one wildly self-serving question for the folks back home. We love to show off the historic Allen County Courthouse in downtown Fort Wayne. Is the annual judicial conference coming back to our neck of the woods anytime soon?
We're coming next year.
Okay. They'll be happy to hear that.
I have been I've been to Fort Wayne since I was at Purdue, so that would be in the 80s. And your growth and your downtown, love some of your restaurants too. So, you've got a lot to offer the judges to come.
It's stunning. I grew up in Fort Wayne and remember when it was lights out, a lot of the week, and now it is hard to find a place to park.
That ballpark's nice too.
Oh, it's stunning.
It is, the way it's connected. I'm thrilled to date. I think I've been there 4 times. This will be the 4th time as a judge that I've brought all the judges. So get ready, Allen County. You're going to have about 550 judicial officers up there.
You mentioned our baseball field. Major League Baseball brought an event there back in August and sold it out. It was really amazing. Well, I got to tell you, it's been a privilege talking
John,
to you today. I feel like we could talk about your job and the future of the courts all day long. I know you're busy and need to get back to the important business of the Supreme Court. Any final thoughts?
No, thank you for doing that. Again, I think the more you sort of pull the curtain back and people hear from the judiciary and hear how much we care about what happens, I think the judiciary is used more than any other public institution. 1.1 million cases, there's 2 people on the side, 6.8 million Hoosiers.
Wow. Well, Chief Justice Loretta Rush of the Indiana Supreme Court, thank you for being on INSession. Thanks for taking the time, not just today, but so often in everything you do, to help Hoosiers understand what the courts do.
All right, thank you, John.
This has been INSession, an inside look at the Allen County, Indiana courts. You can find out more on this topic and others at allensuperiorcourt.us. Thanks for listening. The next episode's coming right up.